What turns ordinary village quarrels into a firestorm of accusation and a landmark legal proceeding? In the shadow of Pendle Hill, in the year 1612, the county of Lancashire was gripped by a chilling wave of paranoia. This was a time of profound religious upheaval and social anxiety, where superstition held sway over reason. Here, a web of family feuds, whispered curses, and claims of dark sorcery ensnared an entire community. The story of the Lancashire Witches is not merely one of folk tales. It is a stark chronicle of how fear can be weaponized. At the single sensational trial, presided over by men of the law determined to root out what they believed to be a profound evil. Based on the testimony of a 9-year-old girl, 19 people were brought to Lancaster Castle, their fates hanging in the balance. How did a local dispute escalate into one of the most infamous witch trials in English history, leaving an indelible mark on the nation's conscience and legal system? This is the story of the law, the lore, and the lives caught in the crossfire. The year is 1612. In the rugged, isolated region of Lancashire, England, the winds sweeping across Pendle Hill carry more than just the scent of rain and heather. They carry whispers of fear and superstition. This is a land caught between ages, a place where the old ways of folk magic clash with the rigid doctrines of the new Protestant state. King James I, a monarch with a profound and documented obsession with witchcraft, sits on the throne. His influence has trickled down through the ranks of authority, empowering local magistrates to pursue any hint of dissent or unorthodox practice with zealous conviction. The dissolution of the monasteries decades earlier left a power vacuum, particularly in remote areas like Pendle Forest. Without the traditional social and spiritual support of the church, the impoverished populace often turned to cunning folk for healing, fortune-telling, and protection. These practitioners, who straddled the line between herbalist and sorcerer, were both respected and feared. In this volatile atmosphere, personal grudges, economic hardship, and religious anxiety created a tinderbox of suspicion. Every failed crop, every sudden ailment, every unexplained misfortune could be attributed to a neighbor's malevolent curse. Pendle Hill itself, a vast and brooding landmark, loomed over the scattered homesteads like a silent observer, its peat-blackened slopes and misty peaks forming the perfect backdrop for the dark drama that was about to unfold. The stage was set for a hunt, not of animals, but of people. At the heart of the growing tensions in Pendle Forest were two destitute families, their names already spoken in hushed tones throughout the community. The first was led by Elizabeth Southerns, a frail, one-eyed widow in her 80s known to all as Old Demdike. For decades, she had been the region's most prominent cunning woman, her reputation built on a lifetime of recited charms and folk remedies. Her family, including her sharp-tongued daughter Alizon Device and her grandchildren, lived in the shadow of her notoriety, scraping by through a combination of begging and the perceived power of their matriarch's name. Their chief rivals were the Chattox clan, headed by another elderly widow, Anne Whittle, or Old Chattox. She too practiced a form of folk magic, placing her in direct competition with Demdike for the meager charity and payment offered by their neighbors. This rivalry was not philosophical but deeply personal and economic. It festered for years, erupting in accusations of theft, malevolent charms, and lamed cattle. The feud created a narrative of warring covens, a story that the local populace and, more importantly, the authorities were all too willing to believe. Each family saw the other as the source of their misfortune, trading insults and threats that would later be twisted into confessions of diabolical pacts. It was a bitter, desperate struggle for survival, where a reputation for magical power was both a shield against starvation and a weapon against one's enemies. This long-standing animosity provided the perfect kindling for the inferno to come. All it needed was a single spark to ignite it. On March 18, 1612, the simmering feud boiled over into a formal accusation. Alizon Device, the granddaughter of old Demdike, was begging on the road near Colne when she encountered a peddler from Halifax named John Law. She asked him for some pins, a common act of charity at the time. When Law refused her and continued on his way, he suddenly stumbled and fell, unable to speak or move his left side. In the medical understanding of the era, such a sudden affliction could only have one explanation: bewitchment. For Alizon, a young woman steeped in a family culture of curses and charms, the terror was immediate and profound. She believed she had, in a moment of anger, willed this calamity upon the man. When confronted, her guilt and fear led to a desperate confession. She admitted to laming John Law through magical means, and, in her panic, sought to deflect blame and gain sympathy. She claimed that it was old Chattox who had taught her such malevolent practices and who had led her astray. This single incident was the catalyst. The peddler's complaint, born of a likely stroke and a young woman's terrified conscience, transformed years of village gossip and family rivalry into a matter of law. The story of the afflicted peddler spread rapidly, reaching the ears of the local justice of the peace. The abstract fear of witchcraft now had a victim and a self-professed perpetrator. The machinery of justice, hungry for such cases, began to turn. The shadow of Pendle Hill was no longer just a feature of the landscape. It was beginning to fall across the lives of its inhabitants, and Alizon Device's confession was the first stone in an avalanche of accusations. The magistrate who took up the case was Roger Nowell, an ambitious and determined local gentleman from Reed Hall. As a justice of the peace, Nowell was not just a symbol of the law, he was its instrument. He was keenly aware of the king's stance on witchcraft and saw an opportunity to demonstrate his loyalty and competence. On March 30th, 1612, Nowell summoned Alizon Device to his home for an official inquiry. Faced with the full authority of the state in the form of the stern magistrate, Alizon repeated her confession. But Nowell was not satisfied with just one admission. He pressed her for more names, more details. Under the weight of his interrogation, Alizon's story expanded. She implicated her own grandmother, old Demdike, claiming the old woman had a familiar spirit and had bewitched others. Then she turned on the rival clan, formally accusing old Chattox and her daughter, Anne Redfern. Nowell had skillfully turned a single accusation into a web of conspiracy. He subsequently summoned Demdike, Chattox, and Redfern. In the intimidating environment of Nowell's inquiry, away from their homes and stripped of their local status, their defenses crumbled. Old Demdike, perhaps seeking leniency or succumbing to pressure, also confessed, and in doing so, validated Alizon's claims and implicated Chattox further. Old Chattox, in turn, confessed and accused Demdike. The magistrate masterfully exploited the existing family feud, turning daughter against mother and rival against rival. With these signed confessions in hand, Nowell had what he needed. He committed the 4 women to Lancaster Castle to await trial at the next assizes. With the family matriarchs and 2 others imprisoned in the dungeons of Lancaster Castle, the remaining members of the Device family were left in a state of desperation. On Good Friday, April 10th, Elizabeth Device organized a gathering at their home, the ominously named Malkin Tower. Friends and sympathizers from around Pendle Forest attended. To the attendees, this was likely a support meeting, a desperate council to discuss how to secure the release of their relatives, perhaps by pooling resources for aid or legal help. They shared a meal of mutton, a detail that would later be used against them as evidence of a feast. However, Roger Nowell, hearing of this clandestine assembly, saw something far more sinister. He suspected a coven meeting, a witches' sabbat. Nowell continued his investigation with renewed vigor, bringing in Alizon's brother, James Device, for questioning. Under intense pressure, James provided the story Nowell was looking for. He confessed that the Good Friday meeting was no innocent gathering. Instead, he claimed it was a malevolent plot. The primary objectives, he alleged, were to secure the release of the 4 women imprisoned at Lancaster, to harm the governor of the castle, and to blow up the castle itself. This testimony was a pivotal turning point. It elevated the case from a series of local squabbles and minor magical infractions into a full-blown conspiracy against the state. The meeting at Malkin Tower, regardless of its true purpose, was now officially branded as the Great Assembly and Feast of the Witches. Nowell had his grand plot, and the fate of everyone who attended that Good Friday meeting was sealed. The entire case against the Pendle Witches hinged on a single, terrifyingly powerful voice, that of 9-year-old Jennet Device. Brought before the magistrates, including the ambitious Roger Nowell, this small child became the key that would unlock the prosecution's ambitions. In the intimidating quiet of the interrogation chamber, surrounded by stern-faced men who represented absolute authority, Jennet was coaxed and pressured to recount tales of witchcraft. She spoke of clay figures, of familiars, and of secret gatherings. Her testimony was a chilling mix of childish imagination, overheard gossip, and what was likely carefully guided instruction from the authorities themselves. She implicated her own mother, Elizabeth, her brother, James, and her sister, Alizon, along with many of their neighbors. Each word she uttered was meticulously recorded, her frightened narrative transformed into hard, damning evidence. For the magistrates, her youth made her testimony seem pure and irrefutable, an innocent witness to profound evil. For her family, it was a betrayal born of fear, a death sentence delivered by a child who could not possibly comprehend the finality of her own words. The quill scratched across the parchment, and with each stroke, the path to the gallows grew shorter for those she named. Her tale was complete, and the mechanism of justice, once set in motion by her account, became unstoppable. The fate of an entire community now rested on the recorded words of a terrified girl. The journey from the shadow of Pendle Hill to the formidable stone walls of Lancaster Castle was not merely a physical translocation. It was a ritual of degradation, a public descent into a new and terrifying reality. For the accused, wrenched from their humble cottages, this was a grim procession. The heavy cart, its ungreased wooden wheels, groaning a constant lament under the weight of human misery, trundled over deeply rutted, muddy tracks that passed for roads in the spring of 1612. They became a public spectacle, a traveling cautionary tale for every hamlet and village they passed. Anxious faces peered from doorways and windows, some with morbid curiosity, others with fervent, righteous condemnation, their whispers and pointing fingers a constant, invisible assault. The guards, mounted and sternly impassive, pushed the procession onward without pause, allowing no respite from the biting wind, the scorn of the populace, or their own escalating dread. This 50-mile trek was a calculated ordeal, designed to methodically break the spirit long before any formal trial began. The landscape itself, the wild and unforgiving moorland of Lancashire, seemed to conspire against them, its bleak beauty now a source of profound hopelessness. Under a vast, indifferent sky, perpetually heavy with the promise of cold rain, they traveled onward. The accused huddled together for a sliver of warmth, their simple woolen clothes, damp and coarse, offering little protection. Among them was 9-year-old Jennet Device, whose coerced testimony would prove so pivotal. Her small, shivering frame was bundled in the cart, her young eyes taking in the hostile world that was now her judge and jury. For her, and for the others, each laborious turn of the wheel was a turn of the screw, tightening the knot of fear. The destination promised no sanctuary. As they crested the final, windswept hill, the imposing silhouette of Lancaster Castle rose against the horizon, a fortress of law, but for them, a symbol not of justice, but of an impending and inescapable fate. It was here, within these formidable walls, that their stories would be twisted into confessions, and their lives weighed in the balance of superstition and ambition. The summer assizes at Lancaster Castle, convened on August 18, 1612, were less a quest for empirical truth, and more a formidable performance of state authority. Presiding over the proceedings were two experienced judges, Sir James Altham and Sir Edward Bromley. These were men dispatched from London with a clear mandate: to uphold the king's peace and purge the remote county of what was perceived as a festering infection of superstition and lawlessness. The accused, gaunt and disoriented, after weeks in the castle's damp holding cells, were brought before a system already predisposed to find them culpable. The evidence presented was a tangled web of local animosities, spectral tales, and supposed confessions, many extracted under conditions of extreme duress. Yet, one thread wove through this chaotic tapestry with a chilling and undeniable potency: the detailed testimony of 9-year-old Jennet Device. Propelled into the intimidating solemnity of the courtroom, Jennet became the prosecution's pivotal witness. With a disturbing composure that belied her tender age, she recounted elaborate tales of clandestine gatherings and diabolical pacts. She calmly implicated her own mother, Elizabeth, her sister, Alizon, and her brother James. Her words, delivered in the high, clear register of a child, possessed an unnatural gravity within the hushed hall. For the judges and the packed jury, her testimony was the irrefutable centerpiece. What greater proof of profound wickedness could there be than a child bearing witness against her own kin? It was an emotional masterstroke that swept away any lingering judicial skepticism. The verdicts were delivered with stark rapidity, a cascade of guilty pronouncements against the cold stone. Justice, in the 17th century, was not a delicate balance, but a swift hammer of certainty. In the matter of the Pendle Hill accused, the voice of a single child provided all the certainty the court required to enact its final, irreversible judgment. The final day of the assizes, August 19th, dawned over Lancaster Castle, the light struggling through the high, grimy windows of the Shire Hall. The air within was stale, thick with the scent of unwashed bodies, damp wool, and a palpable tension that clung to the very stones. A profound hush descended as the judges, Sir James Altham and Sir Edward Bromley, entered in their solemn robes, their presence a physical manifestation of London's unyielding authority. The long, harrowing spectacle of testimony was complete. The fate of 19 souls now rested upon the deliberations of the jury and the strict interpretation of law by these two learned men. The evidence, particularly the damning and detailed narrative provided by 9-year-old Jennet Device, had been presented as irrefutable fact. Her youthful certainty had systematically dismantled her own family, a performance of memory that the court found both chilling and convincing. The jury, local men of property and standing, returned their verdicts with grim, unhesitating efficiency. Guilty, the word spoken again and again, was not a shout but a tolling bell in the cavernous room. Alizon Device, who began it all with a simple accusation. Elizabeth Device, her tormented mother. James Device, her brother. Anne Whittle, the old matriarch known as Chattox, and her daughter, Anne Redfern. The respected gentlewoman Alice Nutter, standing resolute in her stark disbelief. All were found to have entered into forbidden pacts. Judge Bromley then rose to deliver the final pronouncements. His voice was steady, devoid of passion, reciting the cold letter of the Witchcraft Act of 1604. For 10 of those standing before him, the sentence was absolute and final. They were to be taken from the court to the place of public reckoning to meet their decreed end. Justice, in its severe and necessary majesty, had been served. And the prescribed remedy was now to be administered upon the hill overlooking the town. A new, cleaner chapter for Lancashire was about to be written. Etched by the hand of the law, the echoes of the sentences passed at Lancaster did not fade with the autumn chill of 1612. On the contrary, they reverberated with profound and unsettling force through the hallowed halls of English justice for generations to come, establishing a troubling and influential precedent. The entire case, constructed upon the fragile and highly suggestible testimony of a 9-year-old child, Jennet Device, and bolstered by confessions likely extracted under conditions of immense psychological duress, became a new benchmark for prosecution. Yet, it was a benchmark deeply and irrevocably flawed. In the quiet studies of London and the debating chambers of Oxford, legal scholars and a new wave of skeptics began to meticulously dissect the proceedings. They posed a fundamental question that struck at the heart of the judicial process. What is the true weight of spectral evidence? How could any court, sworn to uphold fairness, justly condemn an individual based on the intangible stuff of visions, dreams, and unsupported hearsay? The trial's official published account, The Wonderful Discovery of Witches in the County of Lancaster, penned by the court clerk Thomas Potts, was intended as a triumphant justification of the verdicts. Ironically, it had a dual effect. For some, it became a dangerous instruction manual for future persecutions. For a growing minority, however, it stood as a glaring, public testament to systemic judicial fallibility. The great pendulum of societal belief, which had swung so far into the realm of superstition, was beginning its slow, almost imperceptible, return journey toward reason. Figures like the physician John Webster would later directly challenge the very foundations upon which the Lancashire convictions stood, championing the primacy of observable, empirical evidence. The enduring legacy of Pendle was therefore not merely one of personal tragedy, but of institutional crisis, a powerful, albeit painful, catalyst for sweeping legal reform. It forced the English legal system to confront its own demons, to question its most basic methodologies, and to slowly, painstakingly, erect a higher, more rigorous standard of proof. The law itself had been placed on trial, and its eventual verdict would help forge the principles of a more enlightened age.